So I got some comments about this deck that I used to play. I'm still playing it a little bit. I pretty much put it down to grind with Teachings and figure out if that's a real deck. So I might pick it up now that I know that Teachings is okay. There's other people working on Teachings now, which is cool. So anyway, this is what I called UW Phaedrazi. It's just what I have it as in the deck editor. It's on Goldfish as MTG Blink, and there is basically a month straight of me 5-0ing with this list, or very close to it. And I got a lot of comments about um, being a blue-white taxes deck. Where did this deck come from? What's going on? Why are you playing for Muldrifter? All this nonsense. So I just want to do a quick deck tech for everybody and walk you guys through what's going on, because this is a really intricate deck. And it's a really neat deck to play because it gives you a lot of options, which is something I really like as a player. I never like sitting down and not having any play against people or like skill. Like I can't leverage my skill to outplay people. I just find decks like those that are nonsense. And if you are a decent player, all you want to do is find a good deck that leverages your skill and gives you an advantage. So this deck does that really well if you're good. Sequencing is really good with this deck. People don't see stuff coming with this deck because who the hell plays Spell Stutter Sprite? Sometimes you can play planes into like planes, and then like Violent a Spell Stutter Sprite, and people are like, what the hell are you doing? I can't believe that happened, and other nonsense like that. So this deck, not only is it like kind of okay, but it's very surprising for people, and no one has play experience against it. So it's pretty rough if it's your first time playing against this thing. So I'll just do a quick breakdown of the deck. So first of all, I always like starting with my lands. Lands are really the meat of any deck in Modern, and I find that how good your lands are really dictates your strategy. So in most fair or semi-fair decks, your lands have to be quite good to compete. So like in the Teachings deck, that's really not like a fair deck, so it doesn't have to play really overpowered lands. But in this deck, you have 4 Eldrazi Temple and 4 Mutavault. So these lands are insane, and they are by far the reason to play the deck. So um, Eldrazi Temple basically got banned from Modern because of its combination with Eye of Ugin. But if you draw 2 Eldrazi Temples, it's still the Eye of Ugin opening with Unsere, which is uh, just disgusting. So always try to be a Luxec and draw 2 temples into Thought Knot with this deck. The other important part about the temple is it powers Displacer to abuse your ETBs, and it sometimes just makes Displacer watch Wolf, which is okay. So it's really strong, and it's probably one of the main reasons to play this deck along with Displacer. And the other land is Mutavault. So Mutavault is the best man land in the format by a mile, but it's pretty much unplayable because of how badly it ruins your mana base. I think the only deck that really plays it is Merfolk, or like the other fairies deck, the blue-black one that tries to like shove as many as you can in. And this deck, the colorless upside is actually pretty decent for enabling Displacer and Thought Knot. And it also combos with Spellstutter Sprite to form this mini lock with Displacer, Mutavault, Spellstutter, and kind of like you blink Spellstutter out, and you can counter up to the amount of fairies that you have plus Mutavaults, and that's really cool. So the other lands, but now we have 4 Seachrome, easy card to put in here. 4 Darker Ice that I just cut, but easy card to put in here. And then we have 2 Hollowed Fountains and 2. So we have 2 Hollowed Fountains, and these are just the worst other land that I can play. You don't really have fetch lands, but you just want the best land you can after you have enough basics to not get pathed out of games. And against blue-white, with Path and Field of Ruin being really big players, you want to have I found at least 4 basic because this deck really leverages its mana advantage over people. So most Taxes deck play 3 basics, but having 4 is a little bit better in a deck where you're trying to grind a little bit more. So right now I am 3 plains, 1 island. I also think 2/2 is fine with island 2 island, 2 plains, because you have the Spencer over here. But what I found in the Blood Moon games when I get Blood Mooned is the first thing I want to do is find a plains, and that'll plains turns on Path to Exile, and that Path to Exile turns on my second white source or my first blue source. And what that eventually does is let me break out with a Flicker Wisp sometimes, and then set up some like float mana Flicker with shenanigans and kind of play alongside Blood Moon and not get completely wrecked, but sometimes it just completely wreck you, and there's really nothing you can do about that. The other one here is Celestial Colonnade, and this is just sneaking a manland into the deck. It's really expensive. You'll never want to activate two, but sometimes the fact that you can activate it changes the lines of play in the game. So like if they have a Jace and a bunch of ground guys, or I don't know what deck actually plays ground guys and Jace, but like when you have a Colonnade, the threat of the line of Colonnade changes game state sometimes, and that's pretty powerful, even if it's just a tap land that doesn't really do anything. Most other taxes, or most other semi-taxes decks, or whatever you want to call them, play a couple more man lands than Colonnade, but you also have Mutavault, so you're really not, and your mana is really tied up in this deck. So those are the lands. I think the lands are pretty set. I definitely wouldn't cut any of these colorless lands. People do that all the time when they see the list, they pick it up and they cut a Mutavault or two. And that is really awful because they form, not only do they form the Spellstutter Sprite lock, but they do a really good job of checking Planeswalkers against sweepers and things like that. So if you have multiple Mutavaults down and Liliana comes down or Jace comes down, they have to account for you attacking them, just attacking their Planeswalker. That makes them Planeswalkering you and grinding you with Planeswalkers a little bit harder for them. And that's a really important part of this package, because Planeswalkers grinding you is a real big deal in this deck, and you'll see that when we get to the sideboard. So right now we have the 4 Aether Vial, and this is the best card in the deck by a mile. Try to keep hands with this deck that have Aether Vial and are anything resembling reasonable. Everybody knows how good this card is. I really don't need to say anything, but in this deck specifically, it is a little bit better than in most decks because of the way that you can sequence things with Displacer, Flicker Wisp, Reflector Mage, Spellstutter. Like, all these things are just really, really strong when they're sequenced more effectively. So Vial, MVP. Then we have Path. So Path is just the removal spell in the deck. You need something. Paths are great. Everybody knows how good Path is. I really don't need to cover this one. Giving them land is a big drawback, but, you know, whatever. There's really no other card that competes with this card. Then we have this one Relic. This is just like a 16th sideboard card sitting in the main deck, basically. It's okay in a lot of matchups, and it does lower the curve a little bit, because as you can see here, you don't really want to cast Path early in the game. So you really only have 5 plays that cost 1 mana, and having Relic makes you have 5 instead of 4. And since your deck is a bunch of curve, like a huge 2, 3, 4 curve, having more 1s is just easier to like double spell. It's pretty easy to get Relic into play, whereas any other card that I put in the 1 CMC spot is just gonna suck. So I've tried Thraben Inspector. He was pretty awful. I've tried Fairy Imposter, which was actually pretty decent, and I might actually go back to as a 1-of. Just as an additional fairy for Spellstutter Sprite, blowing people out with Vial on 1. And just being another random way to get people, but I don't know if he's strong or if he's just like really, really spicy, so that's something you can try if you really want to pick up that card. Then we have the 2s, so the main 2s package is, first we have the Thalias. Thalias are great. Everybody knows how good Thalia is. GDS, other low CMC decks just really get taxed, and it's more of a tempo play in this than like a I'm going to tax all your resources kind of play. What you want to do is kind of just slow them down enough for you to get an advantage on the game and pull ahead. So Vial does that, Thalia does that, and all these other cards in the deck really just kind of let you do that. So a big part of the Thalias in this deck is the Spellstutter Sprites. So Spellstutter Sprite is a card that is very, very powerful, and people walk into all the goddamn time and they've never seen it before, and they just blow people out. So Thalia specifically, with Spellstutter Sprite, is very powerful because people try to kill Thalia and they sequence in ways that let them kill Thalia and then have follow-up plays. But if they're killing Thalia for 2 mana, which unless they're gut-shotting, they have to do that, Spellstutter Sprite comes down, either makes them spend another 2 mana to answer the Sprite or the Thalia, or it just blows them out because now they're locked out of whatever sequence they were trying to do, and then the Thalia sticks in play. So Spellstutter Sprite is really good with the Thalias, and it's really good with some of the other cards in the deck, and I'll get to that when I get there. So Wall of Omens is just an idiot that 2-for-1s people and sits in play for value. It helps smooth things off the Aether Vial draws, and he comes down and just sits there a lot of the time and does absolutely nothing. But sometimes him blocking is a 2-for-1. So there are certain cards that all they do is attack, like Bloodbraid Elf. This card is like 2 mana, like trade for Bloodbraid Elf evenly, which is kind of weird, but kind of great. And any other deck trying to attack you has to get around Wall of Omens, which, like, you would think wouldn't be that hard, but the fact that they have to spend a card on your card that is basically free in this deck is really great. Um, so Wall of Omens, I would not cut him for any reason. He's also part of the value engine of the deck with Displacer. So uh, when I get to Displacer, I'm going to explain a lot of things, but I don't know, let me decide to remind myself to do that. But right now, just Wall of Omens, really good card, lets you block really well, and this deck is actually secretly a blocking deck, which no one really understands. So then we have this Phantasmal Image. I've shaved him down to 1, and the reason he's here is because he makes Vile on 2 really hard to play around, and he kind of just makes things really awkward for your opponent when he comes down. He can also clone Thought-Knot, he can clone any of the ETBs in the deck, he can clone Flicker Wisp, and he can clone a Displacer and then blink the Displacer and save it from a removal spell. He's really, really versatile, and I wouldn't cut him, but he's really not very strong as anything more than a 1 of, maybe a 2 of I've found, just because you get some draws where you're forced to clone something awkward, and that's kind of shitty. But there are some other games where he comes down and you can like clone a Thought-Knot off a Vial, and all of a sudden they just get blown up because all their removal's gone. And yeah, so Phantasmal Image is really, really good in this deck as a 1 of, don't cut him. So then we have the 3s. So the 3s are the Displacers, which we'll still get to later. The 1 Vendilion Click, and Vendilion Click's kind of bad in this deck. I don't like him at all, but what he does is he is a fairy, and having more fairies lets your Displacer lock get active a lot easier. That makes the Spellstutter sprites a little bit better. So the main purpose of him is to just make Spellstutter sprite and this Displacer lock a little bit stronger and not be completely awful. So he's not completely awful, and every other fairy is basically completely awful. So that's why he is here. Not very good, I would say. The other cards are Reflector Mage. So Reflector Mage, really good against Death Shadow, really good against Thing in the Ice. Generically, just kind of great against any deck trying to kill you. Especially once you get Displacer Reflector Mage going, that can just be a disgusting combination of cards. It just does some really unfair things, especially if they have multiple cards of the same name stranded in their hand. If you see that, you can often just like Reflector Mage something in play and just leave them like never casting a dude for a while, and it's pretty really great. Another big part of him is against Thing in the Ice. It's a pretty hard counter to Thing in the Ice because he comes down, bounces it, and they have to bolt it. Otherwise, it'll go back to your hand, and you'll bounce the Thing in the Ice and start like this weird mini game of that going on. Especially if you have Vile on 3, like the games against Phoenix with this deck get real weird and real grindy because when their things flip, they bounce all your ETBs to your hand and you just grind with them in this really awkward way as long as you don't like randomly explode to things. So he's pretty great. Don't cut him under 3. He has some trouble in matches where he is a dead card, but even then I find that he's okay. Like against things like Tron, bouncing Worm Coil still has a ton of game, and just anything with a creature basically that can be bounced and not completely abused with an ETB, he is very, very strong. So keep him in the deck for sure. Then we have Flicker Wisp. Everybody knows how good Flicker Wisp is. I really don't need to cover this in a blue-white Vile deck. But one important note of this deck is the Flicker Wisps. First of all, they have Wall of Omens here, so they are more reliably a value card, as just coming down and drawing a card, which makes them stronger in this deck than a lot of other decks. They also, when we get to the sideboard, you'll see that this package here helps supplement the Mull Drifters in the sideboard, which no one really understands, but we'll get there, I promise. So then we have this Venser. So Venser as a 1 of is just very strong with Displacer in bouncing things, especially Tron lands and spells that cost more than like that they have to tap out for, basically, like Primeval Titan off a Cavern, or Primeval Titan, what else? Tron spells, Tron lands, Terminus if they have to hardcast it, things like that. He also does some nifty tricks with bouncing creatures, and he's just generally overall pretty versatile as a one-of, and gives you some lines that are very difficult for your opponent to play around, because who the hell plays Venser, and he always comes down as a big shock. So yeah, he's pretty good. As a one-of, don't play two of him. Yeah, Venser's pretty good. So then we have Thought-Knot Seer. Thought-Knot Seer basically, the heart of this deck against anything unfair is trying to jam a Thought-Knot Seer at them, and then putting up a bunch of protection. So generally, Thought-Knot Seer is checked by Path to Exile in this format pretty aggressively, and sometimes Fatal Push. But against those decks, a lot of times what you can do is you can line up a Spell Stutter Sprite to eat the first removal spell, or you can set it up so you look at their hand, you take something, you incentivize them to remove the Thought-Knot, and then you play Spell Stutter, and then your Thought-Knot actually lives, and you go to town on them. The other important part of the Thought-Knots in this deck is you have a Venser, and you have these 3 Reflector Mages. So sometimes what you can do is you can bounce the thing to their hand and then eat it with Thought-Knot, and that is a pretty important line in a lot of games, because a big problem with Thought-Knot in other decks is him coming down on certain board states or certain game states where, unless you're vialing him in on 4 to like ETB their card, it's very difficult for him to come down at a profit and grind with people. And the reason that is he comes in, he doesn't eat a card, and eventually he dies to something, and they go up a card because they didn't lose the initial card. And that makes Thought-Knot like a liability in some of the other decks. But in this deck, sometimes you can get a bounce off and then Thought-Knot their card, and that makes him a little bit better. There's also a whole bunch of things you can do with Displacer. So we're going to get to Displacer now. So Displacer is by far the heart of this deck. He is what makes it work, and he's what makes it tick. So individually, he can just blink something and protect it, or he can blink their creature and knock it out of combat or prevent it from attacking you. Though that is Displacer level 1. Displacer level 2, it gets pretty interesting. So first of all, you have the Reflector Mage. You can bounce Reflector Mage and blink something. You can bounce Venser and lock people out of spells. You can block Thought-Knot Seers during draw steps and start taking cards from people. You can blink Wall of Omens to form a value draw engine, and you can blink Spell Stutter Vanillion Click to do something very similar to the Thought-Knot Seer. You can blink Spell Stutter Sprite to not only to basically act as a counter spell, but to also protect your Displacer from bolt, pushes, paths, that kind of thing. And you form this lock. So if you have something in play and you have a Vial on 3, this deck is fairly terrifying in the lines that it can have, because Displacer coming down just opens up so much options with the deck. Another important part, we'll get to the sideboard cards in a second, but he combines really well with some of the sideboard cards to do some really nonsense things. One thing I definitely want to cover with this deck, though, is you need to know what the Declare Blockers phase is. So no one in Modern really uses the Declare Blockers phase, so it is an unknown to a lot of opponents. But what you do a lot of the time in this deck is you block something, and then you Displacer your own guy that has blocked, and that knocks it out of combat. So if someone's attacking me with a Gurmag Angler, and I have a Wall of Omens and a Displacer, all I do is I throw a Wall of Omens in front of the Gurmag Angler, and I just blink my Wall of Omens, and he can never get through. And I keep pulling ahead with drawing a card. Granted, that line is weak to Battle Rage, but the fact that you can block and then blink a guy and do your value grind engine after blockers are declared is very, very strong. And like the entire reason this deck is any game against humans at all spirits is a lot harder from what I played the deck, because you can't just throw a Wall of Omens in front of them and block value grind them. Another important part of that is Displacer blinking Flicker Wisp. So if they attack you with 2 things, you can block one with Flicker Wisp and one with Wall of Omens, and then you can blink Flicker Wisp, and that Flicker Wisp can flicker Wall of Omens, and you can set up this loop of block 2 things, draw a card, and just slowly pull ahead. And this deck leverages its mana real well to get ahead, and just keep making land drops, and eventually Displacer just runs away with games after like 3,000 turns sometimes, but he does it, and he is by far amazing. If I could play like 9 Displacers in this deck, I probably would. He's just that good. He's also just Watch Wolf sometimes if you have Eldrazi Tempo, and you know what? Watch Wolf is a card that at some point we all played and thought was decent when we attack people for 3, so whatever. Then in the sideboard, so the main reason some of the stuff is in the sideboard on the low CMC end here is the deck is really mana hungry and the curve is very very unfriendly to higher CMC spells when you're boarding them in. So what you want to do is you want to board in as the lowest CMC you can, unless it's really really good. So that's why we have the Forge Tender. Forge Tender is the best anti-red card you have. Not only does it come down on one, but it comes down off Vial. It can also be cloned with Phantasmal Image, and it can proactively protect Dahlia or Displacer or a Spell Stutter Sprite. So it's in here over Core Firewalker and some other stuff because I think it's much better. It also protects you from like Anger of the Gods and other things like that. Um, so he is really really good, and I don't think I've ever lost a game against Red when he actually shows up. Then we have Serious Rejection. So this is just the lowest CMC card that I could play that interacts well with Affinity and Tron as a tempo game. I'm not playing Stony Silence, and I never played Stony Silence in this list because I think that the Vials are too strong to sacrifice game against artifact decks. I know that a lot of people say that if you have a Stony and a Vial, their deck doesn't work, but your deck does. And I find that that is sometimes a little bit nonsense in this particular deck because I find that having a Vial and Displacer is just very, very powerful, and I've never wanted to shut that off because you could do things against, not now, but against KCI, like Violin, to Displacer and start playing a Spell Stutter Sprite, and just like making it real hard for them to actually play any of their Chromatic Stars or whatever, and just grinding them out that way. So I never really liked Stony Silence. I would not recommend Stony Silence in this deck. I think it's okay in other tax lists, but not this one. Then we have Twisted Image. So Twisted Image is basically kill target Noble Hierarch or Thing in the Ice or Spellskite, draw a card, and sometimes it also saves Flickerless from Electrolyze, or Thalia from Electrolyze. So it's pretty good. It can be very unfair as a one-of if you see it against a Thing in the Ice draw or a Spellskite draw, and like just having another card that is a low CMC removal spell that is a 2-for-1 is just very strong against Phoenix. So once again, really great card. Then we have the so we'll do the Graveyard Hate package first. So we have a Grafdigger's Cage, and then we have 2 Rest in Peace, and this is just a little bit more diverse for curve considerations, and to have slumming against Collected Company or Court of Calling decks. Once again, if I would not play 3 Rest in Peace in this deck because my goal is to have a curve, and I find against Dredge or Hollow one sometimes it could go under me, and if I was holding all my Graveyard Hate cards, I'd find that real awkward. I find Rest in Peace is the stronger card, but having multiple cards, I would want like Grafdiggers and a Rest in Peace in my hand. And against fair decks like Tarmogoyf or Angler decks, I don't find myself ever boarding in more than 2 Rest in Peace, because I think that when you grind with them, drawing a dead card that does literally nothing is very very bad. So having like 2 Rest in Peace against Tarmogoyf is pretty good, but having like 3 can sometimes lead to you drawing air and them drawing actual things, and then you die. So more Rest in Peace versus fair decks is not an option. Again, it's unfair decks. I think this Grafdigger Cage is a little bit stronger because it prevents people from going under you a little bit more effectively. Because Dredge or a Hollow one can really nut draw you, and Grafdiggers can be a little bit better. And once again, if you have both, you want the split. You don't want just a bunch of Rest in Peace clogging your hand. So that is why there is the split. Everybody knows how good Rest in Peace is. I really don't need to cover that like at all. So we're just gonna skip that one. Then we have this 3-card package, which is just a very versatile anti-Planeswalker package. Pithing Needle and Sorcerer's Spyglass are basically the same card in this deck, but they have a different name to dodge Detention Sphere against the blue-white decks. So their main purpose is to shut off Jace and Fairy, and the same with the Detention Sphere. And that lets me grind against those decks with the Mulldrifters. So I'm going to put up a game of me doing that in a bit, but what you'll notice is this deck can go long with people in a way that other Texas decks can't because of your sideboard plane, and people don't see that coming, and they get wrecked by it fairly often because they try to just play the inevitability game on you, and you actually have secretly have inevitability on them, and they don't see that coming, and then they're blown out. So you just want to shut off key cards, and sometimes these cards just do other things too, like hit Expedition Map or Sakura Tribe Elder, or like I've just YOLO'd Wooded Foothills before on this stuff too, because the Valakut matchup is not great with this deck. But there's just lots of things you can hit with these, and as long as you're not playing against a deck with Kolaghan's Command that punishes you for leaving in artifacts, um, shutting off Planeswalkers with these cards is very strong. So yeah, definitely do that. It's also good to have different names against Maelstrom Pulse in the GBX decks if you want to board it against the Lianas, but I don't know how much I really like these cards against the Liana because it's not too big of a deal. Then we have Detention Sphere. So Detention Sphere is the third Planeswalker removal spell basically, but it also has some other utility, getting tokens or getting a Blood Moon off the battlefield, or getting chalices. It does have the split clause, which is important to note because if you blink a Flicker Wisp or you Venser it in response to the ETB, you can do some tricks with it too that you couldn't with the Beauty of Detention. So keep that in mind, but most of the times it's just Oblivion Ring, but a little bit better. And also people don't really see Detentions for coming, so it's always pretty good. And yeah, also it can hit Ensnaring Bridge, which is good. But I don't think this game has much game against Ensnaring Bridge decks, so whatever. Actually, it's okay against Lantern, but against Word Prison it really struggles because of Torpor Orb being a card. Anyway, so now we're going to the 5 CMC cards in the sideboard. So Cataclysmic Gearhulk is the answer to anything going wide in this deck. He is the answer to humans and spirits mostly. So if you ever cast this guy against humans or spirits, you pretty much win the game on the spot. Displacer means that you can blink it and then just keep the Displacer and the Gearhulk, and they're somewhat locked out of ever having another creature. And if you have 3 other mana, you can blink their only creature forever, and they can never get anywhere on you. The other important thing about this is it is a creature, and it is a 5 CMC card, so it does not get spell quellered at all, and it gets through all of the hexproof nonsense that Spirits has. So it is just a very, very good card when it comes down, and it prevents decks from going wide on you too. Like I boarded this in against Storm before as a one-of. It comes in against Elves or any deck trying to like make a billion go wide guys, and he just really shuts that avenue down in a way that no other card really does. He also sometimes just gets artifact decks, but I find that Torpor Orb kind of blows you out when that happens, so that doesn't really happen reliably, but sometimes he does, and it's pretty sweet. Then we have the Muldrifters. So Muldrifter is by far the most contentious card in the deck. Nobody really understands the power that is the Muldrifter, and everybody cuts them and tells me that I am wrong. So I just want to go on record and say, you guys are all idiots. Muldrifter is amazing, and you don't understand. So Muldrifter is, first of all, it forms a package. So we're not just playing Muldrifter, we're playing 8 cards that help abuse ETBs and Muldrifter. So that means when you see a Muldrifter, the first Muldrifter can often find you another Muldrifter or one of these 8 cards, and you can just start chaining Muldrifters on people, and that is incredibly strong. In the late game, if you have a Displacer and a Muldrifter going, you win the game. Like, you just pick up like 6 cards a turn, and it's dumb. Like, I can't tell you how dumb Displacer and Muldrifter is as a 2-card combination. So some other reasons Muldrifter is good. He is a 2-for-1 against the green-black decks. He gives you inevitability against Lantern decks, just giving you cards, blinking him, making it real awkward for them to take everything. Any deck that's just trying to like go super duper long against you, oftentimes you just board a Muldrifter and you crush them. Because they don't see it coming, and they think they have inevitability, and they don't have inevitability, you have inevitability. Against GBX decks, he also dodges Inquisition of Kozilek like a champion, despite being a 3 CMC spell. He sometimes just is bad divination, which is sometimes totally fine, because Lord knows you just want to jam 2-for-1s against some decks, against GBX for example. Just having a 3-mana 2-for-1 and having them not be able to IOK that is pretty great. Granted, it doesn't play to the board, but that's fine. He also sits in play a lot of the time because he doesn't get removed easily in this format. So He gets bolted, sure, but if he gets path, you're happy. If he gets, he cannot get fatal pushed, which is great. And the Liliana's the 3 mana plus Liliana, um, that -2/-1s can't really kill this guy, where he can normally kill a lot of other stuff in the deck. So he just sits and play like an idiot half the time, or hitting for 2. And then at some point in the game, a Flicker Wisp, a Damage, or a Displacer shows up, and that just starts drawing you cards, and you spiral out of the game. So Muldrifter, real strong, and you don't understand. Another important line with the deck is Aether Vial and Muldrifter. So if you Aether Vial on 2, and you evoke a Muldrifter, you can blink a image on with Muldrifter on this deck. You can also evoke a Muldrifter and Vial in a Flicker Wisp and draw 4 cards and keep your Muldrifter. And if you evoke a Muldrifter, you can also blink it with Displacer and just double up on the ETBs for free, basically. So Muldrifter, real strong in this deck, but you have to have a real good understanding of who is the beatdown and who's not the beatdown. And that is really radical to change, because what you'll see is post-board, I am the control deck, you are the beatdown. And that's kind of funny in a lot of matchups, because that doesn't really ever enter people's minds. So that's UW Blink. I'm going to put up at least one game with Muldrifter, because I just played it, just to show you guys the truth that is the Muldrifters, and we'll go from there.